Greetings, everyone. My name is Dr. Jay Singh, and I'm the founder of Publication Academy, your online training partner for higher ed career advancement and professional development. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today for this installment of our Career Pathways series, Exiting Academia. Today, we have a fascinating interview with Dr. Bailey Dewey, who successfully transitioned from completing a PhD in cultural anthropology into the exciting industry vertical of educational consulting. So let's go ahead and get right into it. Over now to our amazing Publication Academy interviewer, Dr. G. Nantra.
Welcome everyone, Dr. G. Nantra here, and today I'm so excited to welcome Dr. Bailey Dewey. Welcome, Bailey.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk with you today.
I'm excited to talk with you too. So to start off, could you tell us about your educational background and what you're doing now?
Yes, my training is in cultural anthropology. I did both my master's and my doctorate in cultural anthropology at the University of Colorado Boulder, specializing in research on race and ethnicity in the United States. And I currently work as a market researcher.
Amazing. So you currently work as a market researcher with the background that you have. What made you want to move from academia to doing something that is not academic?
Yes, this is one of my favorite things to talk about, and that is from the time that I entered graduate school, I had a feeling that I was not interested in the tenure route. I watched older grad students who were in the programs for longer than I were, go through the process of the applications and trying to get tenure, and then watching really the mental health toll that came sometimes to those who did get tenure lines and worked even harder and had even more variables to think through than what we have in graduate school, and kind of identified that that was not the route that I was interested in going. I love research. I loved doing research and working on teams to do research. And that was what I identified as being my main motivator in getting my doctorate, and then also something that I was looking to highlight in the job that I was going to do after graduate school.
Awesome.
And that did not look like academia for me.
Thanks for sharing that. And thanks for also sharing the very real toll that academia can take on people's mental health. I think we don't talk about that enough. And I think I was reading a statistic this week about graduate students and people in graduate programs, right? Not just PhD programs, but people in like medical school, all that, having maybe like 5 or 6 times the risk of becoming depressed. And I was like, oh, that's scary. That's scary.
Yes.
But it tracks, because I remember being in grad school, and grad school was okay. I had a great mentor. My postdoc was great. But there was just something about it. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. So you work in market research. What does a day-to-day look like? What does a day in the life of Bailey look like?
Yeah, I think when we say research, it's such a vague term for a lot of different things, but market research specifically is really designed at pattern recognition within a specific sort of discipline, if we want to think about it that way, or industry. And so a lot of what I do is I look for trends that I can then suggest that might help the clients that we work with make better, more informed decisions about how they can identify the needs of their stakeholders or potential clients that they may have with the products and the services that they offer. And so my training as a social scientist, who focused on pattern recognition, as a cultural anthropologist, specifically in cultures and systems, was really useful there. And a lot of the skills that I had developed in my time in academia translate really well to the work that I do now. It just looks a little bit different.
Yeah. So let's talk about that, right? The transferable, translatable skills from your time as an academic cultural anthropologist to now. What are some of those skills that you use every day, or what are some of those skills that helped you get the current job you have?
Yeah, so in the social sciences, again, pattern recognition is really big. But when we think about cultural anthropology, we often are taking a very large and complex system like a culture, sort of collective thoughts that folks hold together, ideas that create common bonds between people. And we try and uncover what those different webs and sort of strings of entanglement look like. So that could mean, for my research in academia, looking at how individuals conceptualize the idea of race and understand their own race. I was specifically working with mixed race populations, so that meant looking at how things like current events impacted how folks think about race, or how, somebody's phenotype compared to their siblings' phenotype, even though everybody has the same ethno-racial identity and the same family, how they might identify differently based on their own lived experiences. That type of skill, that pattern recognition, and the ability to be able to hold a lot of complex thoughts at the same time and make sense of that and communicate that, translates into the work I do around market segmentation, for example, where I look at all of the different players involved in an industry and make sense, for a client, about the different lanes that each occupy, the different considerations that these different segments may have as they think about their needs and what they're looking for in terms of their next purchase or a next product that they might want to adopt.
Wow, amazing. And so a few things that you touched on: pattern recognition. You touched on looking at systems. If I don't want to mess it up, looking at systems and basically segmenting or breaking it down so that it's understandable, because systems are complex, right?
Yes.
And then I figure that based on what you do, you use a lot of communication as well, right? In communicating whatever it is you find in your research to stakeholders, right?
Right, exactly. And so being able to write very technically when my stakeholder audience is, a specialized researcher who's looking for that more high level sort of nuance is just as important as being able to break that same information down to the sort of other members on that team who are looking for something different, in that analysis. These are all skills that folks who go through the PhD program have. We're good communicators, we're good researchers. Even if you're not a social scientist, most of us are really good at pattern recognition because of the type of theorizing that we're doing. And I think that those are often seen as soft skills, but that are really important for some of the jobs where research is a focus outside of academia.
Yeah. And, and to your point, I think a lot of people underestimate the power of these skills or think, oh, it's just like that thing, because as academics, we're very, very focused on our topic. Like in your case, you're doing research on mixed race people and how they identify and all that. And that's the topic. And we can get very, very siloed into the topic and forget that, wait, on the way to studying this topic, there's all this stuff I've had to do, there are all these skills I've acquired, and those skills are really valuable to companies outside of academia, right? And so, on the money. Thank you so much for sharing that. How did you find your current job? And
Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that. How did you find your current job? Because sometimes people are like, I don't even know where to start looking, right? So how did you find your current job?
So I was actually on the job market for almost 2 years when I finished my PhD. And that is not a unique story to me from what I've heard from folks who are making that transition, because in the eyes of non-academic professionals, we are making an industry jump. And so when you make an industry jump, there's a lot that comes with it, that can make your job search a little bit more complex. But I actually found my job through networking, through LinkedIn. And one of the pieces of advice that I got early on was to, reach out to folks who had similar job titles that I was interested in. And to folks in organizations doing applied research who also had PhDs, because they would be able to speak to, that transition process from that academic background into that industry work. And those were the folks that really provided me with the most guidance and affirmation that, this is a really tough process you're going through, but you're going to get the job offer, and, it's just a matter of time. Sort of keep at it. They're also the folks that can help you do some of that translating. And so just by having conversations, with other PhDs who had made the shift outside of academia, they would flag, hey, you said this, actually, you might want to refer to that thing as this other thing, because that's what that, word translates to outside of academia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's so interesting that you mentioned that, right? Because we also, talking about culture, right? There are words that we use within the academic culture that people outside of academia are like, what is that? Like we don't even care about that. But you could be very well talking about the same thing, but you're using different words. So what's an example of that, for instance? Do you remember an example of that?
Oh my gosh. Trying to, so, for example, when we talk about like planning our research or going through the process of writing a perspective or, putting together a research proposal, those things might be called just a research plan or just the scope of work that you're, doing with a client. That's not the best example. I can't think of a great one right now, but there's like little word shifts like that. Like, this is not your prospectus or your dissertation plan. This is actually your your scope of work that you're working on with a client. The content is essentially the same. It's a project plan. It's back planning research. It's what the deliverables will look like. It's just called something different. And so on your resume, if you were then to say that you know how to write a prospectus, well, that's great, but that's not necessarily going to translate to a hiring manager who is looking at that, even though the document might be the same, just with a few sort of tweaks here and there.
Here and there. No, that's it's a really important point you bring up, because I think we sometimes talk about what we did. We super focus on our research. One of the problem, like the challenges I've interacted with hundreds of PhDs at this point who were like, "Hey, could you review my resume?" And I've reviewed the resume and like, you're talking like an academic. And
Yes.
this could be why you may be struggling.
Right.
And to your point about that 2 year, looking for a job, and it's not uncommon. I went through a season of maybe like 18 months of like just applying and applying. In between there, I was freelancing and adjunct teaching.
Right.
But it's real. It's real. So for those that may be watching this and looking to transition, don't be alarmed if you find that it's taking a little long. It takes, like Bailey said, they see you as, oh, she's shifting industries. She's trying to make this career pivot. And that is definitely much harder. Once you're in it though, then it becomes easy to move with across companies and such. But that initial, there is definitely a lot of friction moving that first role. So good job for sticking it through. It wasn't. I know it wasn't easy. I know it was. Because I went through a similar experience. So yeah, amazing. Now, what would you say was the hardest parts of like, clearly it's been 2 years. It was 2 years, right? So that was really hard. But what would you say was the hardest part of making this transition?
Was that I was actually getting traction when I was applying. So I applied for hundreds of jobs, but I don't even know how many hundreds I applied for. But I was routinely getting first round interviews, second round interviews, and final round interviews. And I think that was the most frustrating piece, because I was doing everything right, but hiring is such a complex situation that you walk into. So losing a role to an internal candidate, that was really tough.
Yeah.
Understanding, why that decision happened. Asking for feedback after a work sample or after a final round interview and being told that I come across as too academic in the way that I speak, right? Things that, you don't necessarily have control over how others perceive you. You can use the right words, but if somebody clocks you as being too academic and sees a PhD and makes that, assumption in their mind, that's an assumption that they have. And there's not a whole lot that you're going to be able to do to address that. So the hardest part was getting so close, but not actually getting an offer. And by the time I accepted this position that I'm currently at now, I had been a finalist for 8 different roles over that 2-year period. So clearly the resume was working. I was interviewing well. It was just a matter of, and I actually had a hiring manager afterwards tell me that they didn't know, or they didn't feel comfortable betting on somebody that they didn't know could deliver research in that setting. I could do research, it was clear, but could I do research in their office? So it's almost the situation of you need somebody to give you that chance to be able to show that, I can translate my skills, I can do all of these things. And so finding the right organization and right team that's going to give you that was the most frustrating part about this.
Yeah, and you bring up such a good point, right? Sometimes you just need that first person to give you a chance.
Yeah.
Really, like you just need that, to just praying that first person will give you a chance, because
right.
I love that you said that I was doing everything right. I was getting the interviews, but you cannot control people's perception of you. And also, this is what has made I've had people reach out to me and say, "Gee, do you think I should leave my PhD off my resume?" And I tell people not to do that, right? Because you cannot, how are you going to explain where you've been for 5 or 6 years?
Right. Exactly.
You were clearly doing something. So I know that part of it, that piece of it can be challenging, but leave it there. The right person will take a chance on you. The right person will take a chance on you. Thank you for being transparent and sharing that.
Yeah.
Do you have any regrets about leaving academia?
No, not at all. I have, I like teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And so I adjunct teach the courses that I have designed and I care about still. And that is exciting for me. I get to spend that time and interact with students in the ways that I want to, not because I have to and I'm adjuncting 6 classes because this is the job and I'm on the job market and I'm hustling. Like, I'm teaching because I want to teach at this point.
Yeah.
And that's really exciting for me. It's a really great outlet that I have to be able to share, the sort of subjects that I'm really passionate about. And I'm a much better instructor because I'm choosing to do it, not because I'm doing it out of necessity.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that that's not the path for everybody, but for me, it's been a really good balance. So no, I don't see myself ever going back to academia. I don't have regrets of leaving it. And I think sometimes, depending on your discipline too, and this was certainly the case in mine, it feels very final, that like once you leave academia, you're done. Like you can't come back ever. That's not the case. You can go back and adjunct or volunteer your time or reach out and mentor students or participate in research projects, do community research.
Yeah.
You don't have to have university affiliation to do that. And I have found, a great community of anthropologists who work in industry, who don't have, those academic full-time appointments, and who are still doing really awesome work in meaningful ways, because they want to, because they're passionate about it.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that too, because I think that's what people are sometimes afraid of. I've had somebody ask me, but I have research freedom in academia to do whatever I want. And sometimes I actually question the idea of research freedom. I think at some levels, some people may have research freedom, but I think in general, a lot of our research is now dictated by what can get grants, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I was doing my research during COVID. A lot of grants froze funding during COVID, which means that, if I had even gone up to try and get some of those tenure line jobs, my work would not have been considered in the same way that somebody would have if they had done their field work when the grants weren't frozen, when applications were being accepted and projects were being funded. And I knew my work was good. I knew my research was important and it didn't need the validation of a granting agency for me to know that. And right now, the research that I do and the community work that I do, not being tied to a university, is just as important as the work that we see, community-based scholars who do have those, affiliations doing. I I wish more academics who are considering leaving academia knew that it wasn't a zero-sum game
Yeah.
to leave
Yeah.
academia.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. It's not a zero-sum game. You can be involved at some level, and and, to your point, at the level that you want to be involved, right?
Exactly.
Whether
Yeah.
that's teaching, whether that's community research, whether that's even like collab in my role currently, like we do a lot of collaborations with researchers in academia and clinical institutions.
Right.
So it's not like we're completely removed from
Right.
that. But I've met people who are just like, I can't imagine like not being able to do research, and I'm like, well, anyway.
Yep.
So in getting into this market research role, Bailey, did you feel like you had to get another certification or more education, or what?
No.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you brought this up, because I considered additional credentials my trap during the job market. I was so tempted to pivot and go back to grad school. Like, well, maybe I need an MBA, maybe I need a JD, maybe I need this Coursera training. You don't need that. You don't need any additional trainings unless you are, jumping from, humanities work or social science that's primarily qualitative, and you want to do any kind of stats and advanced, computer work, and you need that technical training. You don't need to go out and get additional skill sets. Anybody who tells you that, I would be very careful about listening to them.
Yeah.
That's what I will say.
Yes. Yeah. No, I'm right there with you. I think sometimes we don't cut ourselves enough slack as people with PhDs or people with advanced degrees, and we think, oh, I have to do this much more. And I'm like, no, you've done enough. You've done enough.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So our time is coming to an end, and I've really enjoyed our conversation, Bailey. But what we've talked about so much, but what extra advice would you give to somebody who is trying to make this transition as a grad student, maybe postdoc, trying to make this transition out into a non-academic job?
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good question. I would say it can feel incredibly isolating when you're on the job market yourself and you're going through this individually, but that there is a whole community of folks that you can connect with, whether it's through a Facebook group or through LinkedIn or through, a channel like this, who have the same or very similar experiences and have gone through it or are going through it. And reaching out and having conversations with folks who are going through this and getting that validation is so important, both to yourself and your growth as a job candidate and as a professional through the process, because you do learn so much going through each interview and, each application. But also to yourself as a person who is probably at the same time, healing from some part of the academic experience. Maybe we can use that language. So reach out to those folks who have made those offers, and hold community in the ways that make sense for you in your process as you go through this, because that's one of the most important parts, about this process, I think.
Yeah. I like to say nobody's an island. We need each other. Right?
Exactly.
Don't try to do things in isolation. Don't try to figure it all. I know that academia has taught us to try to figure it all out by ourselves, but you really don't. They're now, one of the things I'm particularly happy about is that now there's so many more resources than, let's say, 5-6 years ago when I was trying to do the same transition. There were only a handful of people talking about this, but now you have Facebook communities, you have LinkedIn communities. Go find a community and be a part of that. Thanks for sharing that tip. Yeah. This has been great, Bailey. This has been great. Thank you so much for chatting with me.